Hello everyone. This is a presentation about the life of George Friedrich Handel. Um, and I think getting an overview of his work gives you a really good sense of the musical culture of the 18th century. Besides that, he's also hands down the greatest composer of Opera Seria. So, a quick overview about his life, where he was born, where he lived and flourished. So 1685, you can see here his life spans throughout Europe. He's born in Halle in 1685. As a young musician, a teenager, he gets a job in Hamburg. He's a harpsichordist, violinist. There he meets one of the Medicis from Florence. He's interested in writing opera, and they're interested in having talented composers create Italian opera. So he travels to Florence with no mean feat in the early 18th century. So there in Florence, the birthplace of opera, he's exposed to Italian Opera Seria. More about that later. But in the few years he's there, really about 5 or 6 years, he composes a few operas, learns enormous, and then he makes his way across Europe, across the English Channel to London. A couple of very good reasons for him to settle in London. One, London is the largest and the richest city in Europe. There's an intense interest in Italian opera. And the other is that the English court, the monarchy, has a strong connection to Germany. And in fact, within 5 years, the King George I of Hanover is going to be crowned the King of England. And the Georges, they control England for the next century, the House of Hanover. So there's a strong German contention in the English court. That's a very interesting history in and of itself, why the English have essentially foreigners as their monarchs. But it worked for them, and it established a very stable monarchy. And it created a great opportunity for Handel. So let's just do a little comparison of Handel's life with another great composer, born the exact same year, 1685, J.S. Bach. Now Handel here is born in Halle. Bach is born in Eisenach. They're very close. But you can just see right here that this is where Bach spends his entire life, in this very confined area, and essentially a provincial life in central Germany. Born in Eisenach, becomes an organist concert master. Same year that Handel is going to Hamburg, way up in northern Germany, he just simply moves over to Weimar and is there off and on in a few other places in the area as an organist and concert master. He gets a much more important position in the prince's court at Curtin as a Kapellmeister, or director of music, for 6 years, and then he gets his dream job, cantor at the Thomaskirche, or Thomas Church, in Leipzig. That's where he did his most important work, where he wrote all of his cantatas, all of his great passions. There he spent the last 28 years of his life. So very different orbits of experience for Bach and Handel, and that attributes to their very different musical personalities. So let's back to Handel. So let's, what was he exposed to in Florence in 1706? Well, the development of what is now known as Opera Seria. And incidentally, the names Opera Seria did not come into use until this genre was kind of coming to an end in the late 18th century. It's a serious style of opera. I mean, it predominates through the heart of the 18th century, and it flourishes really in the early part of the 18th century. Now, it's serious opera, and the stories often involve tragic figures, but they always have a happy ending. Remember, the Italians always insist on the lieto fine, or happy ending. You can read more about this at an excellent Wikipedia article. And there's, of course, an excellent discussion in your book. The most important figure in the development of Opera Seria is a librettist, a poet and librettist, Metastasio. He is by far the most influential librettist of his day, more influential really than any single composer, frankly. He introduced two very important conventions. One, he eliminated all comic elements from serious opera. And we've seen from the Coronation Epopeia that there's obviously serious elements in the opera, attempted murder, but there's also comical characters. Metastasio thought this was, he was a real purist when it came to serious opera. So he eliminated all non-serious. This has really important implications because it separates out comic entertainment. And in the 18th century, as we'll come later to learn, there's a flourishing of traditions of comic opera in all countries. The other really important convention that he established was a very strict separation of active elements of the story, which are to be sung as recitatives, and the reflective lyric moments in the story, which will become opportunities for arias. So these conventions really cement into place the recitative aria format that we associate with opera in its heyday, the 18th and early 19th century. Essentially, recitative and aria are the developments of the old acting style, which becomes recitative, and the old singing style of the 17th century, which now becomes the full-blown arias. So the recitative, as opposed to the earlier acting style, is much drier, much more speech-like. It really is just heightened speech and not nearly as expressive. And as opposed to the aria, which is a much more elaborate expression, musical expression, particularly in Italian opera. So much more about this as we move to London. So Handel moves to London, enjoys a real success with his opera Rinaldo early on, and indicative of sort of riches and opportunities that are there in London, Handel helps found the Royal Academy of Music in 1719, where he composes. It gives him an opportunity as an entrepreneur, not just as a composer. He writes 3 really important operas in rapid succession. Most well known is Julius Caesar, 1724. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but you'll listen to the whole opening set of arias. The whole opening scene has an opening aria, then a recitative where all the action takes place. So nothing is happening in the aria, at least as far as furthering the plot, but you're presented with the character in all of their intense passion. At the opening of this opera, Caesar has just defeated his rival Pompey's forces with the help of Ptolemy and his sister Cleopatra. But in the recitative immediately after his opening aria, and you get this awful scene where Ptolemy presents Caesar with his rival Pompey's head. This in front of Pompey's wife and son. Caesar is deeply offended by this. This all happens in dry recitative, so as intense as you might think such a grotesque scene would be, it still only has a simple harpsichord and cello playing underneath it. The characters wait to really express themselves in their arias. So immediately follows 3 arias in succession. One from Caesar, who's indignant, one from Cornelia, Pompey's wife, who is grief-stricken, and one from Sesto, Pompey's son, who swears revenge. 3 separate arias, and so this gives you a sense of it's kind of a stolid dramaturgy, but for what it's not fluid at all, but it's intense. All right, this is an excellent recording from Les Arts Florissants at the Glyndebourne Festival, so enjoy that. Now, not very long afterwards, 1729, there was a huge hit in London in an opera in English. The Beggar's Opera. There's an excellent discussion of that in your book. The audience, it was the taste for Italian opera had always been more intense in the court, as is true everywhere in Europe. But in England, as some Germans once referred to it in a deprecating fashion, is a country of shopkeepers. The court is not, the aristocracy obviously are important and have a lot of power, but they share more with the middle class. And the middle class didn't want opera in Italian. They wanted to hear opera in English, and they wanted to hear opera in with characters that they recognized. And the Beggar's Opera sort of fed that the craving for such entertainment. So the success of the Beggar's Opera is indicative of the lack of interest that's developed, that Italian opera is descending into. This is a nice example. It's a nice discussion in your book about the Beggar's Opera. Another important thing, it's in English. The dialogue is spoken. And this is a harbinger of the development of comic opera or non-serious opera throughout the 18th century. This doesn't keep Handel from continuing to try. He eventually moves on to work to lead 2 other opera companies. Has some success, but over time gives up writing opera and starts taking up oratorio. Oratorio being a sacred and also non-staged, even though its dramaturgical structure is very similar to opera, with recitatives and arias. And of course, if you know anything about Handel, you know that he wrote The Great Messiah. 1741 was the year he composed Messiah. That is the year he composed his last Italian Opera Seria. So that's the life of Handel. If you enjoy it, go back and look through and really pay close attention to the clips.